I wasn't cheating. At least that is what I kept telling myself. But when he stood there looking at my phone in silence, I realized the truth was already exposed. I still remember the night everything started, though at the time it felt completely ordinary. The house was quiet, too quiet. My husband had already fallen asleep on the couch, the TV flickering softly in the background while his breathing rose and fell in a steady rhythm. I stood in the kitchen, holding my phone, pretending I was just scrolling like I always did before bed. But deep down, something had shifted in me. Something small. Something I didn't even have a name for yet. Boredom. Not the loud kind. Not the kind that screams. The quiet kind that settles in your chest and makes everything feel repetitive, predictable, empty. We weren't fighting. No drama. No shouting. No cheating. Nothing obvious. On the outside, we looked like a normal married couple. But inside, we had slowly become two people living parallel lives under the same roof. We talk, yes, about bills, food, work, the usual things that keep a home running, but the laughter, the long conversations, the curiosity about each other's thoughts, it had faded somewhere along the way, and I didn't even realize when it happened. That night, instead of going to sleep, I opened my social media again, just scrolling, just passing time, nothing serious. That is when I saw him. A post, a comment, a reply. He wasn't even someone I was looking for, but something about the way he expressed himself caught my attention. It wasn't anything dramatic, just a simple, thoughtful comment, but it felt different, warm, alive. I clicked his profile. My brother, I don't even know why I did it. Curiosity? Maybe. Or maybe something inside me was quietly searching for something I wasn't getting at home. His pictures were normal. His captions were light, sometimes humorous, sometimes reflective, no pressure, no pretense. I hesitated for a moment, then I sent a message. Just one. Nothing deep, nothing intentional. Hey, I saw your comment earlier. It was interesting. Simple, harmless. Also, I thought. I locked my phone and went to bed, not expecting anything. After all, people don't usually reply immediately to strangers. And even if they do, it really leads to something, But the next morning, while I was preparing breakfast, my phone buzzed a reply. And just like that, a small spark was light. At first, our conversations were casual, light exchanges, friendly greetings, discussions about random topics, music, work, daily life, nothing personal. But what I noticed was how easy it felt. No pressure, no argument, no silence filled with unspoken tension, just smooth conversation, someone who listened, someone who responded with interest, someone who made me feel seen. And I didn't realize when I started looking forward to those messages. At home, things remained the same. My husband would wake up, get ready for work, sometimes kiss me on the forehead without saying much. We shared meals, but conversations were brief, functional, routine. But my phone became something else entirely. It became a place where I could smile without explanation, where I could laugh quietly to myself, where I felt a version of myself I had not felt in a long time. Days turned into weeks, and without noticing it, the conversations deepened. He started asking more personal questions about my day, about how I felt, about what made me happy. At first, I answered casually, but slowly I began opening up. I told him things I hadn't even said out loud to my husband. Small frustrations, emotional gaps, moments of loneliness I had buried deep inside. And he listened. Not just listened, but responded with understanding. You deserve to feel appreciated. Marriage shouldn't feel like silence. Sometimes people stay together but forget how to connect. Those words, they stayed with me. I wouldn't lie. They felt good. Too good. That is where the problem began. Because somewhere along the line, What started as harmless curiosity began to feel like comfort, and comfort has a way of becoming dependency if we are not careful. I started checking my phone more frequently, waiting for his messages, anticipating his replies, smiling at notifications like they meant something more than they should. At home, I became quieter, not distant on purpose, but mentally distracted. My husband noticed, of course. "Are you okay?" he asked one evening while we were eating. I nodded quickly, "Yes, I'm fine." But I wasn't fully present, not anymore. That was the first time I felt a slight tug of guilt, just a small one, like a whisper in the back of my mind saying, "Be careful." But I ignored it because nothing had happened, right? It was just conversation, just chatting, just curiosity, no harm. At least that is what I kept telling myself. But deep down, something had already begun to shift. I started comparing, not intentionally, but naturally. The attention I was getting online felt different from the quiet routine at home. The excitement of new conversations stood in contrast to the predictability of my daily life. And slowly, I began to crave that feeling. One night, while lying in bed beside my husband, I held my phone under the blanket, texting him again. My heart raced slightly, not from excitement alone, but from something else, secrecy. That moment when you begin to hide something, even something small, that is when you know things are no longer as innocent as they seem. I remember glancing at my husband. He was asleep, peaceful, unaware, and in that moment a strange feeling washed over me. Not guilt, not fully, but awareness. A quiet realization that I was stepping into something I didn't fully understand. Something I hadn't planned for. Something that began as curiosity, but was slowly becoming something else entirely. Still, I continued, because stopping would mean facing that emptiness again, and I wasn't ready for that. Not yet. So I told myself again, it's harmless. It's just conversation, nothing serious. But deep inside, I knew I was already standing at the edge of something that could change everything. And I hadn't even realized how close I was to crossing a line I could never look back. Not until much later, when it would do, when it would no longer, when it would no longer be just about curiosity. Not until the moment everything would come crashing down in a way I never expected. The days after that, everything in me changed. Even though I tried to act like everything was still normal. At first, I started smiling more at my phone than at anything happening around me. I began carrying my phone everywhere, even to places I normally wouldn't. If my husband was around, I would quickly lock the screen, pretending I was just checking time or something unimportant. But inside, I knew the truth. That small connection I had formed, it was no longer just casual. It had started to matter, and that scared me, but not enough to stop. My conversations with him became more frequent, more personal, more intimate in tone, even if nothing physical had ever happened. He began opening up too, sharing his thoughts about relationships, life, even his own struggles. And somehow, we found ourselves talking like two people who understood each other on a deeper level. Too deep. At night, I would lie in bed, pretending to sleep while texting under the covers. My husband beside me, unaware, breathing calmly, trusting me. And that trust, I started feeling it more clearly than ever before. Because every time I hid my screen, every time I turned my phone away, every time I deleted a notification or cleared a chat, I knew I was stepping further away from honesty. But I kept telling myself the same thing. It's just talking. Nothing physical. Nothing serious. That became my justification, my excuse, my shield. But excuses don't erase reality. One evening, while my husband had stepped out to get something from the store, I was home alone. My phone buzzed again. It was him. And this time, the conversation felt different, more direct. He asked questions that weren't just casual anymore, questions that hinted at interest beyond friendship, but clear enough for me to notice. My heart skipped slightly. Not fear, not yet. More like awareness, a realization that the line we had been dancing around was becoming thinner. Do you ever feel alone sometimes? He asked. I paused before replying, because the truth was yes. But admitting that felt dangerous. Instead, I responded vaguely. Sometimes, I guess, that was all it took. From that moment, the tone of our conversation shifted. He started expressing admiration, compliments became more personal, words became more intentional, and I didn't stop it. In fact, I leaned into it without fully understanding why. Maybe it was the attention, maybe it was the emotional connection, maybe it was the feeling of being understood in ways I hadn't experienced in a while. But whatever it was, it pulled me in. And slowly, without any loud warning, without any dramatic moment, I began crossing boundaries I never thought I would cross. Not physically, but emotionally. And emotionally, sometimes that is where the real betrayal begins. I started hiding the conversations more carefully, deleting messages, archiving chats, turning off notifications, keeping my phone face down when my husband was around. Small actions, but each one added up. Each one built a layer of secrecy. And with secrecy comes distance. I noticed it one night. My husband had tried to talk to me about something simple, something about our plans for the weekend. I answered, but my mind was elsewhere, distracted, disconnected. He looked at me for a moment longer than usual. Are you sure you're okay? He asked again. That question, it hit differently this time. Because deep inside, I knew the answer wasn't as simple as yes, but I still smiled and nodded, I'm fine. And he believed me. That trust again. It followed me like a shadow, but instead of stopping me, it made me more careful, more secretive, more aware of how close I was getting to something I couldn't openly explain. One evening, the conversations escalated further, not in a dramatic way, but in a way that felt natural, yet dangerous. He said something that made my heart race a little faster than usual, something that crossed from friendly into emotional suggestive. And instead of pulling back, I stayed in the conversation. I didn't shut it down. I didn't redirect. I didn't set boundaries. I simply continued. And that was the moment. The moment I didn't fully acknowledge at the time. The moment I crossed a line without even drawing a clear one in my own mind. Because sometimes betrayal doesn't start with a big action. It starts with agreement, silence, participation. I remember sitting alone that night after the conversation ended, staring at my phone with mixed feelings. A part of me felt excited, another part felt uneasy, and a smaller, quieted part felt guilty. But the excitement was louder, stronger, more convincing. So I pushed the guilt aside. I told myself again, this is just conversation, nothing has happened. But something had happened. Not physical, but emotionally. A connection had formed that I had started to protect, nurture, and prioritize without even realizing how far it had gone. At home, my husband remained the same, kind, calm, unaware. He still sat beside me, ate with me, spoke to me, trusted me, but I was no longer fully present in those moments. My attention was divided, my mind elsewhere. And that was the beginning of the real divide between us. Not an argument, not a confrontation, but a quiet emotional drift that no one else could see. Only I knew. And even as I was still pretending not to fully understand what it meant, because accepting it would mean admitting that this harmless curiosity had already turned into something much more complicated. Something I was now emotionally invested in, something I had begun to hide, something that was slowly becoming a part of my daily life, whether I wanted to admit it or not. And the deeper I went, the harder it became to imagine turning back. But what I didn't know was that I was already too far in, and soon I would no longer be the only one carrying the secret. Because secrets always find a way to surface, and when they do, they rarely come gently. That day, I thought I had everything under control. My husband had traveled earlier that week, a full 7 days, he said, work related. He even joked about how I would finally enjoy some peace and quiet. I smiled, if only he knew. Because by that point, things had already gone too far for me to pretend anymore. What started as harmless had grown into something I couldn't ignore. And that day, I made a decision I had no business making. I invited him over. Even as I sent the message, my heart was beating faster than usual. No fear, not fully. More like anticipation mixed with something I didn't want to name. He agreed, too quickly, and just like that, it became real. Not just messages anymore, not just emotions behind a screen. Real, physical, present. I spent the next hour preparing the house. Even though I kept telling myself I wasn't doing anything wrong, I just want to talk, that's all, I whispered to myself. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the full truth. The house was quiet when he arrived, too quiet. I remember opening the door, and for a brief second, everything felt normal, like I was just welcoming a guest. But the moment he stepped inside, something shifted. You know that feeling, right? When the air changes, even if nothing has happened yet. That was it. We started with small talk, safe topics, light laughter, trying to keep things normal. But it didn't stay that way for long. Because the connection we had built over time, it was already there, waiting. We sat down in the living room at first, a little distant between us. Then gradually, that distance disappeared. Not suddenly, not intentionally, just naturally, or at least that is what it felt like. The conversation became softer, slower, more personal. There were pauses that lasted longer than they should have. Moments where we just look at each other without saying anything. And somehow, those silence moments said more than words ever could. My sister, that's how lines get crossed, not with big decisions, but with small moments you don't stop. At some point, I found myself laughing, really laughing in a way I hadn't done in a long time. And it was close now, too close. But I didn't move away, I didn't correct it, I didn't stop anything. Instead, I stayed comfortable, lost in the moment, like outside world didn't exist anymore, like consequences were something far away, something that wouldn't reach me. And that was my biggest mistake, because reality doesn't send warnings. It just showed up. I didn't hear the car, I didn't hear the gate, I didn't hear the front door open, nothing. The only thing I heard was the sound that came next, the bedroom door opening slowly. At first, I didn't even react. It took my mind a second to catch up with what was happening. But when it did, everything inside me froze. I turned, and there he was, my husband, standing at the door, looking straight at us. No confusion, no misunderstanding, just stillness. My heart dropped so fast. It felt like the air had been pulled out of my chest. I moved away immediately, like the distance could suddenly fix everything. But it was too late, way too late, because he had already seen enough, more than enough. The silence that followed, my sister, I can't even explain it. It wasn't just quiet, it was heavy, like the entire room was holding its breath. He didn't speak, not at first. His eyes moved slowly from me to him and back to me again, taking everything in, processing, understanding. And that look in his eyes, I had never seen it before. Not anger, not even shock, something deeper, something broken. I opened my mouth to speak. I can explain, but the word felt empty even before they came out. Because what explanation could possibly make sense of what he was saying? He took a step into the room, slow, controlled, dangerously calm. The other man stood up immediately, clearly uncomfortable now. But my husband didn't even look at him. His focus was on me, only me, and that made it worse. You invited him here? He asked quietly. That question, it cut deeper than shouting ever could. Because it wasn't just about what he saw. It was about what it meant. I couldn't answer immediately because the truth was sitting right there in front of him, in our house, in our space, and my silence said everything. He nodded slowly, as if confirming something inside his mind. I see, he murmured. That was it. No shouting, no sin, just 2 words. But those 2 words carried everything. Disappointment, pain, realization. I took a step towards him, my voice shaking now. It's not. But I stopped myself because for the first time since all this started, I couldn't lie anymore. Not even to soften it, not even to protect myself, because there was nothing left to hide. He looked at me one last time, and in that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt before. Not fear of being caught, but fear of what I had just destroyed. Right in front of me, without even realizing how far I had come. And just like that, everything changed.